Hey guys, welcome to the Titanium Vault. I'm your host, RJ Bates III, and today I have my good friend Casey Smith with us. How are you doing, Casey?
Great. Much easier to pronounce now. So
Yes. So, for those of you that don't know, this is actually the second time that I've interviewed Casey. Way back when in the Propelio TV days. You gotta go way
it's been
back in the
like
archives.
it's been like 5 or 6 years. Like
Yes,
5 years?
yeah,
That's crazy.
long time ago. Casey's now a veteran at doing this. The first time I interviewed her, she was so nervous, and it
I'm
was
pretty
so.
sure I wanted to throw up.
This is gonna be a lot easier. So, Casey, tell everybody who you are and what it is that you do in real estate.
I'm just a girl in Dallas Fort Worth trying to make a living. No, I got licensed as a realtor, gosh, 6 years ago now, but immediately went into investing. So since the beginning of my career, I've always worked with investors. I still do. I still run about 5 to 10 listings a month for investors in all varieties of properties. But I run wholesaling company, done the fix and flip thing for several years. That kind of wasn't really my path. So I ended up starting Atlas Transaction Coordination Company in 2019, right before the lovely pandemic we all went through, where we offer a third party service to investors nationwide who need skilled transaction coordinators to navigate the complexities of getting a contract signed to close, whether that be resolving title, dealing with timelines and people and communication. And so since 2019, we've grown to a team of 10, and we have had our hands on probably at this point close to 4,300 plus contracts. So we've seen a thing or two over the last few years. And that's really my main focus now, aside from just buying properties for my rental portfolio.
So that's why I wanted to bring you on the podcast because right now I think the market is so strange in comparison to what's been
Yeah.
happening for a lot of us. For us, we got in late 2014, and so we've seen a lot over the past 9 years. But this is a really strange time, and I keep interviewing investors, and they keep giving me their opinion as to what's happening. But as I ask questions, I realize it's only from their little individual investing business experience. I saw you post on Facebook, which, by the way, if you're not following Casey on Facebook, you need to do that because she gives these updates, and it's like that's all you need to know. It's like, okay, we're good. Casey just told me what's happening in the market,
You
but
know.
you guys closed not like you said touch contracts, but closed over 700 transactions last year. Is that right?
Yeah, we did over 700 actually closed, which is an important metric because a lot of people say they're the biggest and the largest. And yeah, we've had our hands on a lot, but the nature of this industry is things are going to fall through, especially in the market shift last year at Q4. So in reality, despite that, we still closed over 700.
So 700 transactions last year. I'm sure you're going to do more this year. Tell us, give me your opinion as of right now, April 2023. Where are we at as a real estate market?
Yeah. So here's the thing. You have an overlay or kind of like what I call like a conjunction of things happening in any real estate market, which is why everyone is just a theorist because you can only predict so much and there's so many layers to it. So obviously this is a normal high market, right? We're going into spring. This is when a lot of people are selling or wanting to sell. It's just a natural spike in a market. So we have that, and I do see the market picking up. But we also have interest rates that are still fairly high compared to what they have been in the last few years. And so I had this theory that when it shifted and it spiked we really it started in like September, October, November, December. We really felt it. I think everybody did because it was a hard stop in
Yeah.
deals. I had this theory, and I had several listings at the time. Of them all, I only had to take down two, which is pretty good out of
Yep.
10. But I had this theory that people are just getting used to it because you always want to make assumptions about a market according to your experience. And we really only know 2008 for our age range and for the majority of people.
Right.
A lot of them didn't live through the 80s or prior markets to understand what the nuanced differences were. So a lot of people were kind of in fear mode that it was 2008, 2009, but we weren't because there's still a lot of cash in our market versus 2008, which didn't have a lot of cash. They were over leveraged, and that's what we saw. We're actually more similar to the 80s when, for the first time, actually, we actually saw an inversion of where it was upside down, where the appreciation of houses was actually less than inflation, but it was only about a 3-year mark. And then it went back. So statistically throughout time, if you actually analyze the market, you always see that in real estate is an asset that survives inflation. You might have to hold it a little longer. You might not make as much money or equity as quickly. But what we're seeing in the last 5-6 years, probably longer, 10 years, was a buying frenzy because the interest rates were so low. But you saw a huge influx in the popularity of wholesaling and assigning, and now a lot more people getting into the industry. It's a lot more public. There's a lot more information and education out there. Anybody can get into it, really, depending on where you're going. So I think we had so many people doing it, and it was just buying and selling, and kind of like, I imagine, like on the floor of the stock exchange. That's what it felt like if you were actually doing deals. People were bidding over, and it was just wild because they said there's always money in real estate, right? Well, when there's a hard market shift that you've never experienced before, I always like to say people make bad habits in good times. It's true. Really bad habits are formed in good times because you don't really see the risk. And that's what we saw in this last shift of 2022. Most of the people that were wholesaling and assigning, they were pretty new to the game, like a few months in, a year in, 2 years in. And yeah, they cracked the code of selling to these iBuyers and these hedge funds that were buying up like crazy for ridiculous margins. So these wholesalers didn't really learn how to underwrite deals, nor did they understand the market. So they were double closing these deals because that's what you do with these iBuyers. So some of our highest clients that were doing 20, 30 a month, to all these funds stopped, and they got stuck with them. So I'm talking like there was a week where I had one client cancel 10 deals after the seller signed. The hedge funds were like, I'm out. I don't even care. Keep the EMD. It didn't matter to them, the money. So I feel like what I saw was a lack of knowledge and skill of a lot of investors out there that really didn't hedge against risk or understand what the risk was in the event that certain buyers didn't come through. So it was interesting to see them get stuck with a lot of property that they had to end up now fixing and flipping to put back on the market. Then you've got this market here where also it's stalling because even though inventory is still low, people are scared to buy or don't want to buy because they just want to see what's happening. So my theory was everyone was just like, hold on, let's figure out what is going on because this is nothing like we've seen in a really long time. So everyone halted, hard stop. So I'm starting to see it pick back up. I don't know if it's just them getting used to it or if it's a lot more people out of the game. So your more skilled and knowledgeable investors are kind of stepping up to the plate and have the assets or the money to hold and last longer, I guess, than others.
Right.
So I'm seeing a pickup for sure.
I think
in some way.
I think it's a mixture of that because there's obviously the wholesaling aspect and the investors buying, and then there's also the retail aspect of it. And so for us, we were so blessed to have started filming a TV show in August of 2022, which means, what does that mean, Casey? That means we're listing all of our houses for sale in November of 2022, right? Like the worst time to be listing
the worst
TV worthy flips, and it was scary there for a second. Now, because we were the Fort Worth team, we were in a much more affordable price point. So if we were in Dallas, where we were listing for $450,000 to $600,000, here in Fort Worth, we were listing for $250,000 to $350,000. So still affordable. And what we saw in November and December was they set on the market for like 30 days.
Right. Which is still good. It's just not good. What we're used to.
Across the nation, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Here in DFW, that was like unheard of, right? Yeah. That you had to be in a super high price point to sit on the market for 30 days. Now, what we've seen since then with our flips is that as we list, now we're back to the instantly multiple offers over asking price. We're almost back to where we were like 18 months ago. And I think that's because there's the shift to, hey, this is just where interest rates are going to be. And
Yeah.
I think in November, it was kind of like, what's happening? And now it's kind of
Yep.
like, okay, this is the new norm. So now we just have to adjust to it. From a wholesaler's perspective, though, what we saw in November and December was a ton of newer wholesalers coming to us because we have the YouTube channel and we have a following on social media saying, hey, can we JV with you? Sure, send us your deal. Why do you have this locked up at 85% of ARV? Because SFR3,
Yep.
Amherst, all these iBuyers,
Cyber, all of them.
they were buying them. And I'm like, yeah, but why are you coming to me? Well, they terminated. Yeah, dude, no one's going to buy this. You have to
Yep.
go. I think Tiffany High did a really good job of like coming out and saying like she was having to get $30,000 and $40,000 price drops on some of her properties that she's getting under contract. And we were feeling the same thing, even on some of ours. But I've been saying this since like 2019. Like if you're
Yeah.
relying on hedge funds, you're in trouble. And so I
And
think
that's the case with any business, right? I think, like I said, when you're reaping in so much cash, you don't think, how do I diversify and reduce my risk? And that's something I had to do because 75+% of my business were wholesalers. And so back in 2000, actually the end of 2020, 2021, I started saying, no client or type of strategy should be over a certain percentage because real estate can be so, think about all the different strategies that are coming out now. Like, markets call for different strategies and different situations. And if you don't have that tool belt and that diversification for your revenue, things like this can rock you and take you out. I do believe that you can make money. The reason I target investors and the reason why I like the investor world is because we know how to make money in any market. Because there's a certain mindset. It's not an emotional thing for us. It's a logical thing. And the numbers are the numbers. And you can make money in the market. You just have to learn how to buy and understand that your numbers are not going to be the same. Your price points are going to give you different results. You mentioned your lower price point, and I wanted to just comment on that. All of my deals were also in that lower price point, which is why I didn't feel it so badly, was because we were in that I think anything above like 250 to 300 was really halting, but there were still people that could afford that lower price point even at the increase, but we just had to vet the buyers differently. We had to ask, how long are you rate locked? Can you afford if this goes up in this interest rate, because it was so exponentially increasing? So I think investors need to learn how to ask the right questions and safeguard themselves for these types of things, and I think this market is teaching a lot of them about that.
I will say it was, I want to transition to something that you said, but before that, I'll add one last thing. All of our flips that we did at the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023, we did with Nicole Espinoza because she's on the show with us. And it was an experience because Nicole's experience of flipping houses has only been in Texas. Whereas Titanium, we have done flips in Arizona, Alaska, Hawaii, Ohio, Mississippi, Missouri, other places, right? Some of our offers that came in had negotiating factors that you just weren't seeing in Texas, but you've seen in other markets. For example, hey, will you give us $5,000 back? Will you, there were things that they were asking that to Nicole, she was like, I can't believe that this is happening. And it wasn't because she's inexperienced. It's just her experience of flipping houses here in Texas was not that. So I will say, if you're listening to this and you're outside of Texas, you've probably experienced this over the course of time, depending on what market you're in. Now, going to something that you just brought up, and I want to transition to this because you talk about this a lot. You work with a lot of wholesalers, and I feel like 2 years ago, Pace Morby made sub 2, like the thing. Now the thing is Novations. Okay?
Novations.
Right.
Yep.
So let's talk about, I hear you talk a lot about, hey, if you're going to do something creatively, make sure you understand how to do this, line up the paperwork, talk about that a little bit to the audience that's like maybe either doing novations or wanting to get into it from a TC perspective. What are you talking about? What is not being done correctly?
Yeah. So novations is a more advanced strategy, not just in sales, but also transactionally. And there's a few different ways to do them.
Yes.
And the reason, and I've been doing novations since before they were a thing. So they're actually pretty common in the Northeast because of a transfer tax that is on real estate.
Yep.
And in order to avoid that tax, which is a pretty expensive tax, and they've talked about attaching it to both sides of the transaction, it makes sense to do those to not close on the deals. But also, a lot of these properties need reno and repairs, and so novations are not a new thing. It's just new to certain markets. I'll just preface with that.
Yep.
So there's a lot of different layers of compliance that you have to understand in transacting these, because you're bringing in, there's the sales aspect with your sellers, then there's the title company and how they do it and what they'll allow and not allow. And then there's a lot of these people are putting these deals on the market with equitable interest, like a wholesale, for a retail and buyer. When I say retail, I mean someone that's typically going through a traditional bank with a lender. So now you've got a layer of compliance with a lender, and you have a layer of compliance with a broker and an MLS board on the rules for listing certain things. And so all of those things kind of come together, and certain things are state regulated and certain things are specific to the broker or specific to a title company's office policy. And so you have to understand how you're transacting them. For example, a lot of people use power of attorney with the sellers. Okay. I'm not a fan of this strategy at all. And the reason being, you sign a contract with the seller, RJ, then you're going to go and list it. You have to sign listing documents now on behalf of the seller, but you're also a principal in the transaction at this point. So now we open a can of worms of fiduciary duty.
Yep.
And legality. And a lot of MLS boards do not allow you to list things unless listing agreements are signed directly with sellers. So there's a lot of nuanced things in transacting it that get you to the finish line that you have to understand and know. There's some people that will they don't understand how to protect their interests, because innovation, just for the sake of definition, means that you're terminating a contract and replacing it with another, or replacing an original with something new. In an assignment, you transfer your rights you transfer your rights, but not your obligations. Meaning, if your end buyer falls through, you're still obligated to fulfill that contract. In innovation, you're transferring your rights and your obligations to somebody. So where does that leave you with the seller if that buyer decides not to go through with it, which is a lot of other factors that could pop up.
Right.
That will not let that happen, right? So now you got to enter another piece of paper, an indemnification agreement that is like, okay, well, if this scenario, then this. And so there's a lot of different things you have to decide that you want to safeguard and protect your interest in, and how you're going to do it. So there's a few different ways that people do it. And if you don't understand what your method is based on your local laws, your personal operation, and any brokers or agents you're working with, it can become a huge, frustrating process. And we've seen it with people who want to dive in. Not only do they not know the transactional process, meaning they're setting an expectation with the seller that's incorrect. So when we go to transact it, and when the timeline starts to come into play, their sellers want to dip out because it wasn't what they thought it was. So I'm a big stickler on, if you're going to earn the right to sign a contract with somebody, you have to set up the right expectation for them. And it's as simple as, hey, you don't get earnest money directly in your pocket. That gets held with the title company. Like little things like that are what sellers need to understand and know.
So there's a couple things there's a lot that you said there, but there's one specific thing that I want to talk about, because my good buddy and co-host of Pardon the Disruption, Eric Brewer, he teaches novations. He calls it the Brewer method, which I give him a hard time because Pace has got the Morby method. He's got the Brewer method. I'm like, so apparently if you just do anything that's been around forever, you just slap your
You
last
can just name it.
Right. It's the Bates method, wholesaling. And it's like, no, it's just called wholesaling. But
Yeah.
I love Eric, and I think he's someone that does this the right way. Okay.
I agree.
But I will also say that when you talk to Eric, he does them in York, Pennsylvania. Okay. So he knows how to do them in York, Pennsylvania. Right.
Yep.
The other thing that Eric talks about is the reason why he's doing novations is not to sell it at full retail to the conventional buyer. He's doing this to sell it at a slightly discount to the FHA and the VA buyers. And then you talked about, well, there's compliance to the lender, to the type of loan that your buyer's getting. So explain that to the people that might not understand, because right now I'll go live on YouTube and I'll be on the phone with a seller and I'll get 27 comments as I'm getting off the phone, and they're like, "Why didn't you novate that?" And I'm like, because it's in bumfuck Arkansas, one, and I don't know anything about that. And then also the loan compliance of making sure it can actually get approved for a VA or an FHA loan. So talk about that.
Exactly that. So yeah, so well, to kind of give context to this answer, in this market, we're seeing a lot of people that couldn't compete, like FHA buyers and lower, income buyers, come to the surface because they can finally compete for a property, which means we have to deal with the requirements of their loan types and what the property needs to have in order for it to qualify for the loan. And right now, anyone will take any buyer, right? Let's just move these properties.
Right.
So I also have dealt with more FHA and VA loans than ever in the last 6 months. So what that means is, now FHA is probably the strictest type of loan. And that's because it's a government assistance loan that requires that a property has to be a certain standard of livability, I guess, for lack of better terms, in order for them to loan on the property, to have the property as collateral. So there's like a long checklist of things that they're going to require. And just as an example, and it's ridiculous, is there can't be chipped paint anywhere, even on an outside structure, because of lead-based paint rules. I mean, if a toilet's running, they're going to flag it. Anything that could
But Casey, the seller said it just needs cosmetics. Just novate
exactly.
it. You just do a novation and you just list it on the MLS and you're going to make 20 grand, right?
So the problem is that this seller doesn't have the money or the time or the desire to do any of these repairs. So that means that if you're contracting it and you're not closing on it and you try to sell it to one of these buyers with a traditional lender, you are going to be the one responsible for making those changes to the property in order to get it qualified. Then the question arises, well, what's my liability then? What if the loan doesn't go through and you've already put money and work into this property that you don't own, legally? How do you protect yourself? And that's a whole nother conversation of paperwork on, do you put a lien against the property as a contractor? Or how are you getting, compensated for that? So there is a complexity there that if you don't have the knowledge of what those requirements are, you can't just say novate the property. It has to fit a certain box, in order to do that.
Here. You said the seller doesn't have the money to make the repairs on the property, right? I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, and I might be wrong on this, but I'm going to go ahead and say the only person in that transaction that has less money than the seller is the wholesaler that's taking it down under contract. And so now you have the new person who's taken power of attorney and says, I'm essentially the new owner of this property and I'm going to list it. And then they accept this FHA offer, and the FHA offer says, well, you have to do these 27 items. And they're going, well, this is not what YouTube told me would happen.
Yep.
YouTube told me true. In 35 days, I was going to get $20,000 wired to me, And this is always my problem. Like, and again, I love Eric. I love Pace. They're my good friends. The problem is when you make something sexy and these people do not hire Eric and Pace and get taught by them on how to do it at the level in which they're doing it, this is where mistakes happen. And if these mistakes continue to happen, this is where the government steps in and takes away a beautiful thing from the rest of us. And that's where it's like, we have a responsibility. If you're going to do a novation, you better know what the fuck you're doing.
And I'm glad that you're calling this out because we work with brewer students. We're actually referred, for a lot of them because we do know how to do them correctly and we know how to ask the right questions to make sure they're prepared to do them. I have all these guys who have barely wholesaled a deal coming to me and saying, well, how do I transact an innovation? And I'm like, no, why? Why are you doing it? So my number one question is, why do you want to novate the property? And that's going to reveal your depth of knowledge and understanding as to when this strategy makes sense and whether you have the skill set to execute it. And so that's my number one question I ask, and I can't even count the amount of clients that have called me personally and been like, so walk me through this. And now if they're experienced, I can, and I can speak their language. If they're not, I ask that question. Why do you want to do it this way? What is it that you can't do in other methods and strategies that you want to do here? And then you're right. It's because they hear, well, I can make so much money in this market. And I'm like, sure, but you can't just go to step 100 when you haven't experienced steps 1 through 99 in experience.
What we call it. This is what we say: exit strategy first. The exit strategy then determines your acquisition strategy. So for us, even if you're a wholesaler, you have to understand what the exit strategy is. What is it? Is it going to be a flip? Is it going to be a rental? Are they going to seller finance? Are they going to wholesale, Airbnb? What is it that they're going to do with it?
Yes.
And in this case, the problem is that novation has become this new hot topic, and everyone's talking about it, and everyone's wanting to do it because it essentially eliminated needing to understand and underwrite a deal. That to me is the epidemic that's happening right now. It's not a flip, it's not a rental. It's just I need to have enough margin from what I think it could sell for and not to do anything. And so it's like you're wholesaling it to that FHA, VA buyer without doing anything because they hear it on a podcast that you could do that. But there's a lot more nuances that go on in that. And even from your perspective, the paperwork is so important. And the way that you do it, like when you were talking about power of attorney, is that the way? You don't want it done that way?
Nope, I don't. I don't want it done that way. And because I've been flagged, I've personally been flagged on MLS for somebody trying to use a POA. And I said, we can't do it this way. And I had to take the listings down because they wouldn't be transparent with their seller. And that's another element here. You in these types of deals, you better be really skilled at being transparent and working with that seller in a way that they know what's going on. Because if they don't, you're going to lose that deal. I mean, I know it's pretty common in assignments and wholesaling to be a little bit more covering of that. Like you're not, oh, it's my partner, that's buying. And you can do that because you don't legally have to disclose in most states. In some states you do. Mm-hmm. But as we've learned through some of the deals we've done in other states, but with the novation side of things, it's wild. And this also relates to sub 2 because the kind of you hit the nail on the head when you said exit matters for acquisition, because if you're trying to, I can get these things for sub 2 just to assign them. And I'm like, whoa, the liability on that is such a red flag, because who are you assigning it to? Is it someone who's going to hold it as a rental and now you have no control over if they're going to pay that note that you promised the seller? I don't work with it. I don't take on any clients that wholesale to sub 2s to buyers they don't know, actually, because I don't want to get sued. Right. But little things like that matter. Like you have to understand why you want to acquire the property this way, because it is directly related to your disposition. So 100%.
Cassie has spent no less than 8 hours in this past week unwinding a sub 2 deal in Alaska to understand the nuances of the paperwork. What did you do? What happened here? And then, because of communities that are built with these creative finance, just love affairs. I mean, there were so many people involved. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. It was like she's been on Zoom calls with like 3 people, and there was a 4th that wasn't even on. And I'm like, how are there this many parties involved? And now it's gotten to the point of, hey, can you guys solve this? Because at the end of the day, what needs to happen? The mortgage needs to get paid.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, we need help. And there was an exit strategy, but the paperwork wasn't done correctly. And this is why I wanted to bring you on here, because it's like the one thing that no one wants to talk about is paperwork and transaction coordination.
Tell me about it. It's
But
the
we're
least
30 minutes in,
sexy thing.
and I'm going to tell you right now, there's not been one boring part about this entire interview, because if you're paying attention and you're actually doing deals and you're thinking about doing this is the shit that is going to save you from getting sued, and also, more importantly, screwing someone over, the sellers. We're supposed to be
Yes.
solving their problems.
Yes, and that, like, I feel like we're on the same wavelength at this step, because I understand this is the least sexy thing in the world. Like, nobody wants to do it, which is why I created a business, because riches are in the niches. People need it. And the number one request I'm getting right now, RJ, is for paperwork, which I do not do. I don't give you paperwork because I have a legal liability there. You need to call an attorney. Now, people like Brewers Group do give paperwork, but you still have to get it vetted by your local attorney to ensure that what is in those clauses can hold and make sense for your market. And so, I went to them and I said, how are you teaching them to transact this? And they're like, well, we give them the paperwork templates, and I know these paperwork, and I agree, they do it correctly. But they still have the responsibility of going with an attorney and making sure it's right. And so I get asked, that's my number one request right now, is, can you give me examples of novation paperwork? And I said, I cannot do that because it's a liability for me to give that over to you, and I don't want that. And I do carry very heavy E&O insurance, like the same as a title company, for this exact reason. So, and by the way, I've seen probably 5-6 different versions of novation paperwork. And so it's really difficult to say what you need, because it's not just compliance legally with law. It's also your own operation and what your risk tolerance is. Like, are you going to guarantee buying that property when it doesn't fall through? Are you okay with worst case scenario? Do you even know what the worst case scenario is? And do you have contingencies in place to deal with that? So it's definitely a core thing I'm seeing. And the people that are thriving right now, that are actually doing really good deals, have this stuff locked up. They pay their attorneys for advice. They are putting money into this industry to do things right, and they are able to shift in this market and do it correctly, and they're still closing deals. So I think it's a knowledge thing.
Here is the last thing I'll say on novations, because I want to move on to a couple of other topics, but I am blessed to be a part of the Closers Olympics for the past 2 years. We're coming back to do 2023. They're doing a really cool deal where they're allowing people to apply to be involved, and then they have to win like a qualifier round. So
Okay.
far we've done 2. And 4 people go for 30 minutes, and then there's judges. So this past one, Cassie was a judge. In that, 4 people for 30 minutes. So what is that? That's 4 hours of calling PPC inbound leads from speed to lead. I have heard novations pitched at least by 3 of the 8 people that have gone. That's a problem. It's a problem. It should not be that. It should be an extreme minority scenario in which you're pitching that, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
That's where I'm just going to leave that. And maybe other people have different opinions. I really don't care. That's just my opinion. It's the same thing with sub 2 and seller finance. It just should be in a minority of the situations in which that's the solution. All right.
Agreed.
You commented, or you posted on Facebook, that the average days to close has gone from 50 to, I believe, 20 something.
Like, we're actually, around 30, or between 25 to 30 days, depending on the strategy type and market.
Why? I have no idea what you're going to tell me right now. Why is that happening?
Well, we're still trying to figure out the whys behind this market. Like, I'm just watching it, and I tell everyone, this is weird. There are patterns that I'm trying to decipher and understand. And in any of these situations, you got to look through for patterns. What are the patterns? What are the things that are shifting those patterns? And I have, like, if you guys saw my back end KPI sheets of numbers, it would make you cry. But I am just tracking to find it, because the consistency isn't the same. So what we found, and just to, again, give context, is back in 2020, we also saw a days increase naturally, because everybody halted, but it wasn't for the reason that people thought it was. We found out in hindsight, it's always 2020. It was only because most title companies and lenders had to move from a secure in-office to at-home offices, which means they had to set up security to deal with these types of files that are already in the office. But so it took about 2 to 3 week delay for them to get set up and get oriented. That was actually the cause. So people were like, oh my gosh, everything is halted. Well, it was actually only a small blip. And then it went right back to normal. So now, obviously, everything halted and people were stuck with deals for longer. So we saw an increase in days to close, not only for that reason, but the second was because the novations increased. And we got a lot more experienced clients switching to novations. On average, a novation is taking, depending on the market, 60 to 90 days to close, like on average. And so already it's an extended strategy. And then the rest of the types of deals, your more generic assignments or double closes, or, you know, even just a sub-2 acquisition or a rep, we are seeing them. Well, we coach a lot of our clients on how to do these faster and more efficiently. Like, what are the things you can simultaneously be doing to align your timelines? But we just find that people and lenders are adjusting to the new normal, and they don't have as much they don't have as much volume, so they're able to close things faster, which is sadly the reason. They just don't have as much volume as they had, so they were able to move things. It wasn't anything other than that. And so I think that was the biggest contributing factor to the days to close. But we track this every single week, the averages. And we've seen consistently for the last, I would say 3 to 4, it actually below 30 days on average, which is just crazy.
Yeah. So, all right. You don't have to get into specifics here about specific numbers. I'm just curious. And maybe this is not a KPI you track. Have assignment fees gone up or down in 2020?
Oh, that's a good question. We do actually typically track that. For the last few years, our average is around 17,500 that we saw. And this was across like probably 700 to 1,000 deals. That was a pretty consistent average. We are seeing people go back to assignments instead of double closing, which I still consider a double close an assignment, to be honest. So we're seeing people go back to adding that into their strategy portfolios instead of buying. But I'd have to re-look at those numbers. Now I want to just do quick math, but I won't do that while we're live. Now I'm super curious. But I would say that I think it has gone down because the seller's expectations and the market have not evened out yet. So you have I joke with a lot of my clients that there's a mindset problem right now more than anything. And trying to make sense of it is really difficult logically, because you've got sellers who think their house is still worth $1 million because they're used to a hot market and getting it. And then you've got the buyers who are being way more conservative because of the interest rates. And it doesn't make sense anymore. And so I think that's the misalignment here. And so that's why the fees have gone down, is because they're having to negotiate down huge chunks that sellers aren't prepared for. And then they're not that desperate because foreclosures were stopped for so long. So they weren't under the pressure that they were in the past to sell. So we see a little bit more leeway on the sellers, even though inventory, and that kept inventory low. So I think that's kind of more what would happen. And my theory is if I went into my numbers, I bet you I'd see it decrease.
I'm going to make a prediction that your average assignment fee in 2023 will be higher than it was in 2022.
Ooh, okay.
Even though it is lower right now. Because it's funny.
I'm writing this down.
I've been asked this question since 2018 as when was the recession going to happen? When was this astronomical upward trajectory that we were on going to change? And I always held my answer to be the same all the way until August of 2022 when we did Pardon the Disruption. I said, here's what's going to happen. And it was not based off of any great real estate knowledge that I have. It was just based off of common sense of me like saying, this is how I think it has to happen.
Yeah.
Wholesalers are going to continue to get properties under contract. They're going to be the last to react. The first that are going to be to react are the mom and pop investors. And then immediately that they're going to react to the hedge funds. So as soon as the hedge funds stopped buying, what happened? All the mom and pop investors said, yeah, I'm crawling in my turtle shell. Like, I'm not buying. And I'm going to wait and see what's going to happen because I'm good. I've got inventory right now and I'm going to see what happens. That happened in November and December.
Yeah.
I then said, what's going to happen is that the sellers are not going to change to where the wholesalers need them to be. So your volume, you're going to have a lot of terminations. Then your volume is going to go down because you're not going to be able to acquire anything. Which, what does that mean? No houses are going to sell. So eventually the mindset of the sellers is going to shift. That's where we are right now.
Yeah. And I would agree with that.
What's going to happen is that our buyers on the backside at some point in time are going to say, I need inventory. I need it. I got the itch. Like I got to buy something, you know, I have money that I have to put to work. That's where the opportunity is, because so many people are going to fall out of this industry. So if you're good at solving problems, buying deep, and marketing, which are the people that are still surviving, the ones that are still here, you'll have that margin to make up for what maybe right now you're averaging $10,000, $12,000 wholesale fee. I bet you by the end of the year, you can push that up to $20,000 to $30,000.
Yeah.
That's my opinion as to what's going to happen.
I would say you're probably correct about that, because again, your mindset's going to shift and you have way less competition, and it's gonna happen. And I think the pressure is going to come back on as we kind of readjust. So well, let's remind ourselves to check that data. I'm going to check it now, and I'm going to look at it through a certain time period so I have it ready, and I just want to see that move. But
I need you to make a note right now, like a calendar appointment, January 1st, 2024. Make a post on if RJ's prediction was right about assignment fees being higher.
I love it. I'm definitely going to do that. I also track the percentages of strategy. So, last year, 60% of our closings were wholesale assignments. I call double closes. I put them in the same category. And that also is, sub 2 assignments. It's all wrapped up in there. Right. And then the rest were more creative strategies, purchases, sales, listings, a variety of those types of things. I also am curious to see if it picks back up or if it's like lowered, because I'm starting to get clients that do such a variety now. And that's actually who we like to work with, are people that have a little bit more tools in their tool belt to deal with these sorts of things, because it's a liability for us to take you on if you are a one-trick pony. So we also will be tracking that stuff just to see what reigns as strategy wise.
Gotcha. So for people that have listened to this point and they say, I don't know if I'm in a position to hire a transaction coordination company, who is your avatar? Like, who is the right person? Because obviously it doesn't sound like you necessarily want to coach them through transactions, because that's not your job. So who do you want to reach out to you and say, hey, I need you to handle my transactions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we like you to have a little experience under your belt. It doesn't have to be astronomical. You need to have had the experience of a few deals. At least 1 to 2 years experience is my ideal situation, because we put a lot of effort into training you and processing you based on what your goal is. So, our goal at the end of the day is to make you more efficient, but you have to have some kind of concept and appreciation for process and have gone through all the steps of a transaction to appreciate and value what we do. And that's just a fact. You're not going to value something you don't have experience on. The second thing would be, typically, I would say our majority of our clients are in that 5 to 10 closing a month type range, but we're happily take the 1 to 4 if you are getting some kind of mentorship, or you have some kind of knowledge or education, core values align, meaning you're transparent, you do things right. We don't like working with people who don't like to disclose things to their sellers, or it's just way more red flags and landmines for us to navigate. And a big part of our job is communication and keeping everyone on board. And if you don't have a strong seller who trusts you, it makes our job 10 times harder, a lot more man hours, and it's not really financially makes sense for us to, constantly be dragging your seller to the finish line. So experience is big for me. And honestly, we charge a very normal fee but we also do a lot of title resolution. So we're literally not just transaction coordinators. We're your whole manager for your TC department. And that's where true due diligence happens. You've got a 30-day window on average where you still have to keep your deal together, and you have to kind of dodge all the things that can go wrong with 3 to 15 parties in a transaction. So just in summary, it'd be somebody with a little bit of experience, somebody who ideally has a variety of strategies that they can do. And that's going to be the type of client where we actually do custom checklists for you. We give you KPIs. We actually watch the efficiency of your process. And if we are seeing things for your acquisition or dispo that are slowing you down, we're good enough and we've worked with enough companies to point it out to you so you get better as a whole, not just your transactional piece. Yeah. We did experiment with working with brand new people for an upfront fee where you pay us first. That's non-refundable. And that's simply because you guys typically have higher termination rates because you haven't quite learned how to underwrite or vet your deals as well yet. And so we do that. It's just going to be an upfront fee versus a closing fee.
So from a customer perspective, because for those of you that watch the 50-day challenge that I did in 2020 probably during the entire 50 days that I was live, I was uploading all of my contracts to Casey's system, and we were using Atlas for transaction coordination. It did not work out between us.
It did not.
and here's the reason why. And I'll say this. I said this the other day in a webinar. I said, if people were asking me, should I do batch leads? Should I do batch dialer? Should I buy leads from Speed to Lead Zolo? What should I do? As a business owner, you have to make a decision on what fits your personality type and what are you going to be committed to. Yeah. For me, the reason why it did not work is because, one, it did not fit mine or Cassie's personality types to have a transaction coordinator. Not because Casey's not good at what she does. She's obviously proven that. And I have all the most respect for Casey and what she does as a business. For us, and for me in particular, as the person that was acquiring deals, it was like pulling teeth because it felt so out of my hands. So if you're sitting there and if you have the personality type like me, then this is probably not a good fit. You want a Casey sitting right there next to you where I'm like, hey, place this phone call. Whereas Casey's like, no, we have a process for this. You go into the system, you're going to check the notes. You're going to see where the notes are left, where we've already placed the phone call. And I'm like, nah, I need right here next to me.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that because that is a huge piece. This is why we vet all of the people we want to work with. And to be honest, you guys taught me so much about how to shift doing this. And it was a really good experience because we both were doing something brand new. Yeah. And so you're dead on. If you have a personality where you want that control and you want that immediacy right then and there, bring it in-house and have someone at your call. If you're somebody that is okay and can build the trust to let it go, and by the way, we put a lot more things in place to account for that. But you're right. If you have a personality where you want that control, we aren't the answer for you. If I have clients that are like, I don't want to know the details, just tell me when to sign, and then they trust us to handle with our expertise, great. But yeah, I agree with you. It is a personality thing. It just depends on what your system is set up to do and how you want to do it. And that was such a brand new experience. And just as a side note, ever since you guys were the first to be doing deals in like virtual markets like that, ever since you guys started doing that, a majority of my clients started doing that. And it taught me to say, okay, well, here's what we need before you go into that market, right? Because everything is so different that you can have a system and process for transaction coordinating, but there are so many nuanced variables on it depends and what if, then this, that you have to know the markets and the things that can happen within that market in order to predict that. And so it was a learning curve for everybody, for sure.
It was a learning curve for both of us. I mean, it's funny. You look back at the deals that we did during the 50-day challenge, and there was a lot of different things that we learned along the way. We essentially rebuilt Titanium Investments during those 50 days. And it's like you said, you essentially
rebuilt Atlas
during that because during that, we contracted 86 deals that I believe the majority of them went to you. I know
I
at first 100% of them did. I don't know when we stopped sending them to you.
I think we ended up just stopping around 40 something. I think we
Yeah.
kind of were like, okay, we need to, it was overloading both of our systems in that way. But I really like what you said about rebuilding your company in those days, because I did the same. And that just go to show that if in this industry, if you are not approaching your business with that mentality, you will not survive.
Yeah.
Because you have to constantly be asking every single Friday. I have a team meeting with leadership that says, what didn't work this week? What's working, what's not working, because you have to be adjusting in real time. It's much easier to move a ship, a
It's
few
funny you
inches
say
than to
that because
turn it on.
honestly, I'm at the point now where I almost want to take those videos down because like thousands of people watch them still. And I'm like, we don't do that. But like we're not pulling those
Yeah.
lists away. I'm not naming those lists that I'm not texting anymore because you can't. Like
Yeah.
everything that we're doing, and like I'm a much better closer than I was back then. So it's like everything that we were doing in 2020 is different. That's why I'm going to do another 50-day challenge.
Well, hey, as Gary Harper says, if you're not embarrassed as to where you were a year ago, then you're doing something wrong because
Yeah, but
if you're constantly growing.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on that is just going back to my point is if you're looking at hiring a transaction coordinator, she brought up some really good points, and I'll mirror that from the customer's perspective. Make sure that you're ready to have a transaction coordinator, because here's the thing: when you hire someone to do a job for you, they are going to communicate back with you, and if you don't understand what they're saying, then how do you know if they're doing a good job or not a good job for you? So from that
Good
perspective,
point.
you need to do this yourself to understand what's happening. Like this is
Yeah.
part of the job. So if you're new, you could leverage having Atlas kind of teach you along the way. But the reality is, at some point in time, you need to have those conversations with title companies. You need to
Yeah.
understand how to resolve title issues. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're doing to create value. So there is a
Yeah.
certain level of like you need to be able to do it yourself. The other thing is understand, like for me, I spend a shit ton more money having an in-house TC than just hiring Casey.
Yeah.
That's just a personality thing. It's a personal preference. And for Casey, she was at the same point where she was like, dude, I can't fucking work for RJ and Cassie anymore. Like y'all are fucking
Much love. Much love.
and we do love each other. Like that's why she's here on the podcast, because I have no issues. I'm like, I know you're right. Same thing with bookkeeping. Like I've hired multiple bookkeepers that are not here, and it is like the quickest fire of all time. I'm like, nope, not gonna work. I cannot answer your questions through fucking text messages and emails. I need you right here. I need you to bring me the bank statement and ask me what this charge is for, and then I will answer.
That's really good insight. It really is. And at the end of the day, it's kind of interesting to see. I also see a lot of companies that have they've had the in-house team, they scale back down, and then they're like, I don't want to go through that build again. So we've actually gotten an influx of very experienced operations that again have gone through the value, and it's easier for us too. And so I love the point about you don't have to do it forever, but you have to understand it to value it and figure out who you are and what you need, because we're all different leaders in our own business. So perfect point. Really great way to put it.
All right, Casey. Well, I have taken up enough of your time. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. For everyone that's listening, how can they find out more about Atlas and you?
Yes, perfect. So thanks for having me. It's been a blast to catch up with you for sure. If you want information on who we are and what we do, go to www.atlastcservices.com. There's a little button on the top right corner that you can fill out a little info thing to schedule a discovery call with us if you just want to get a little bit more one-on-one conversation. I'm on Facebook. Come follow me. I know I have a very generic name, but you can also find our company and find me through that on Facebook. Those are probably the best ways. We are about to launch a rebrand here soon, so be on the lookout for that, where we're going to make it just a much better customer experience. And we're also going to be releasing a lot of training material for people like RJ or other companies that do want that in-house, but maybe don't have the time or wanting to train somebody. I'm going to take everything we learned in the last few years and basically just pour it into either self-guide TC training, how to structure and consult your departments, all that good stuff. We're basically just going to give everything we know about how to build it and put it out there here soon. So be on the lookout for that.
Awesome. And for those of you that are watching or listening, wherever you're at, her Facebook will be in the show notes as well as that website. So you don't have to go search that very generic name, Casey Smith. Casey, thank you so much. Last thing I got to say is I need you guys to leave me a 5-star review. And I hate doing this, but I feel obligated to do it at this point. I mean, this is like episode 204 or something like that. And so it'd be breaking tradition if I don't do it. If you thought I sucked today, or really I was good and Casey wasn't, and you just don't want to give me a 5-star review for whatever reason, just go to Real Estate Disruptors. It's Steve Trang's podcast. Leave a 3-star review there, okay? I only accept 5-star reviews, so give me a 5-star review. Steve
I love it.
Accepts 2 3-star reviews. That's all I got for you today, guys. Appreciate y'all. See you next week.